When I was young, English felt like a language made of stones, each word heavy, each sound strange. I grew up in a small town where nobody spoke English. It was a distant language, something for movies and news channels, nothing that touched real life. But deep inside, I dreamed of speaking it, of feeling its power in my voice. People who knew English could go anywhere. They had access to ideas, opportunities, the world beyond our little place. They seemed so confident, so free. But every time I tried, I would stumble. I would blush if someone asked me a simple question in English, and in those moments I felt small, like a caged bird that couldn't sing. One day, a friend showed me an English song. I didn't understand a word, but the music, the voice, the way the singer pronounced each word, it struck something inside me. I listened to it over and over, guessing what each word meant. I started noticing sounds, picking up little phrases, understanding a bit more with each listen. And I wondered, could listening be the key? In our journey to learn, we often think reading or studying is all that matters. But listening gives us something deeper. It teaches us to feel the language, to understand it without needing to translate every word. Every sound becomes familiar, every sentence an echo that stays with us. Listening, I learned, was not just hearing, it was absorbing, feeling, even imagining. Every day, I spent hours listening to English songs, speeches, stories. Sometimes, I would close my eyes and let each word wash over me, letting my mind picture what was happening. I started understanding things without even trying. Words that felt foreign before were now friends, familiar like old songs. One evening, I found a podcast of a man sharing his story of struggle, how he grew up poor but learned English listening to others around him, picking up phrases, accents, expressions. His words were simple, but his story was so real. I listened to every word, feeling his journey as if it were mine. He spoke about the hard work, the tears, the sacrifices, but also the hope that kept him going. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. If he could do it, so could I. I started listening to anything I could find: interviews, conversations, audiobooks. I listened on my way to school, while cooking, even while falling asleep. My mind began to think in English without me realizing it. I wasn't just learning English, I was living it. English is not just a language, it's a way to connect, to understand people from every corner of the world. And the more I listened, the more connected I felt. I understood the humor, the emotions, the struggles people shared in their stories. There was power in this, a power that I'd never known before. Learning English wasn't easy. There were times I wanted to give up, times when nothing made sense, when I felt too far behind. But then I would remember those voices, those stories, and I would find the strength to keep going. Listening wasn't just practice, it was my guide, my friend, my constant companion on this path. Every story, every voice had a lesson, a message just waiting for me to uncover. And slowly, those voices became my own. I could speak with confidence. I could express myself without fear. English was no longer a dream, it was my reality. One day I met an older man who had learned English in his late 40s. He was humble, quiet, but his English was perfect. When I asked how he did it, he smiled and said, "I just listened at first. I thought he was joking." But he explained that for months he would listen to the radio in English while working. He would focus on one word, one sentence, letting it repeat until he understood. His story stayed with me. Here was a man who could barely read English but could hold a conversation because he listened. This gave me hope, a belief that I could learn too. I started paying attention not just to the words, but to the pauses, the emotions behind each sentence. And as I listened, I felt the language sink into my heart. There were days when I felt lost, wondering if I'd ever be able to speak fluently. But then I'd remember the old man's voice, steady and patient, telling me that listening is the true beginning of learning. I would put on my headphones and listen to stories, people sharing their lives, their joys, their heartbreaks, all in English. It felt like they were speaking just to me. Listening became my teacher. It taught me how to pronounce words, how to understand humor, even how to think in English. I realized that language isn't just words, it's emotion, culture, dreams. And the more I listened, the more I understood these parts of English that no book could teach. One night, I found a story about a young boy who struggled to learn English like me. He was shy, afraid, and he too felt like he'd never get it. But he kept trying, day after day, failing and trying again. In his voice, I heard my own fears, my own doubts. And as he spoke about his journey, I couldn't help but cry. It was as if he was speaking my heart. That night, I made a promise to myself I would not give up, no matter how hard it was. I knew there would be struggles, that learning would be slow and painful, but if that boy could do it, so could I. I went to sleep with his story in my heart, feeling less alone. The next morning, I tried speaking to a friend in English. My words were broken, but I didn't stop. She listened, nodding, encouraging me with every word. I could feel the power of the language flowing through me, weak but growing stronger. And when I finished, she clapped, her eyes shining with pride. That small moment gave me a strength I never knew I had. From then on, I spoke as often as I could, not worrying about mistakes. I realized that learning was not just about knowing words, it was about feeling them, letting them become a part of me. I started speaking to strangers, teachers, anyone who would listen. And every time I grew more confident. Listening had changed me. It had taken my fears and turned them into courage. It had taught me that English was not just a language to learn, but a path to understanding myself. As I continued listening, I began to notice things I hadn't before. Words became like familiar faces. I could understand them without having to think. I started picking up on accents, different ways people express the same thought. It felt like discovering hidden pieces of a puzzle, each one adding to the bigger picture. One day, I found a podcast where people shared their most personal stories. Some were heartbreaking, others full of hope. A woman spoke about how she had lost everything and found herself in a foreign country, struggling to speak English, just like me. She described how she would stand in front of the mirror every morning, whispering words, telling herself, "I can do this." I could feel her strength, her resilience through every word. And it reminded me that I was not alone in this journey. Her story gave me courage, a deep belief that this struggle was worth it. I started spending my nights listening to more stories, as if each one could teach me something new. There was something magical about it, like diving into someone else's world. I felt their pain, their joy, and in a way, their English became mine too. Every morning, I would wake up with a new word, a new phrase in my mind. I started repeating them out loud, letting them become a part of me. I would walk around, practicing each word, feeling it on my tongue, as if I were learning how to speak for the first time. It was hard work, but it didn't feel like a chore anymore. It felt like I was discovering a new side of myself. Over time, I found myself speaking without fear. I didn't care if I made mistakes. I knew they were part of the process. My friends noticed, and they started talking to me in English more often, giving me the chance to practice. There were moments when I still stumbled, but I no longer felt embarrassed. Instead, I felt proud that I was trying, that I was learning step by step. One day, a teacher told me, language is about connection, not perfection. Those words stayed with me. I realized that English was not just about speaking correctly, it was about reaching out, expressing myself, sharing who I was. And suddenly, the fear of making mistakes disappeared. I could speak, even if my English wasn't perfect, because I knew that each word I said came from my heart. The more I listened, the more I felt my world expand. I started watching movies in English, listening to interviews, even trying to sing songs. Every word felt like a new piece of my life, something that brought me closer to my dreams. And every day, I felt a little more confident, a little more free. Listening became my habit, my secret tool. It taught me to be patient, to keep going even when things were tough. And in those moments of struggle, I remembered the stories I'd heard, the people who had walked this path before me. Their voices were with me, reminding me that I was not alone, that I could keep going. English was no longer just a language. It was my story, my journey, my strength. And with each step, I knew I was becoming someone new, someone who could dream without limits, someone who could face any challenge. Listening had given me that gift, and I knew I would carry it with me forever.